I rise today to speak out against the so-called Marketplace Fairness Act. In my view, during a time of economic challenge as we are in today, the very top priority of every elected official, whether Republican or Democrat, should be to restore economic growth, to get our economy moving, to get back to the economic dynamism, the economic strength that has lifted so many millions out of poverty and towards the American dream. This bill, if enacted into law, would hurt economic growth and would be a mistake. First of all, more taxes will hurt economic growth, and this bill, if enacted, would in effect create a national internet sales tax. It would subject small online retailers to paying taxes in 9,600 different jurisdictions all across this country. At a time when so many are hurting, we should be discussing how to reduce regulatory burdens on small business, how to reduce tax burdens on small businesses, how to reduce complexity of taxes on small businesses. This bill goes exactly the opposite direction. In particular, those who will be hurt the most by this bill if it is passed are small mom-and-pop retailers online. The threshold for this bill is $1 million in gross online sales. Now, that's not profit. That's $1 million in total sales, gross sales. And $1 million for a starting business is not a terribly high threshold for their gross, not their profits. That has to cover the cost, all expenses of the business. It has to cover any salary, any rent, any web cost, any communications, travel, accounting, legal services, plus the cost of goods sold. To 46 different states find themselves having to pay tax and to be subjected potentially to audits from each of these local counties, each of these local municipalities. You know, I have with me here today a listing of all of the tax rates in these 9,600 different jurisdictions. And it is truly indecipherable that you can look and pick any state and get the county and see the different tax rate. And indeed, in a lot of counties, for example, I just opened this up at random. And, all right, so in Colorado, which I happen to open it up to, if you look in Taylor Park, if it happens to come from the 81210 zip code, the tax rate is 4.5%, but if it's in the same county but comes from the 81230 zip code, the tax rate is 8.25%. Now, small businesses, a small mom and pop just getting started on the internet would be required to comply with all of these taxing jurisdictions, to send the taxes to all of these taxing jurisdictions, and to be subject potentially to audits from 9,600 taxing jurisdictions. That makes no sense. I'd like to point out fairness. The proponents of this act point to small mom-and-pop stores that are bricks and mortar retailers. Large retailers, this bill does nothing about that. Number two, they're losing substantial sales to large online retailers, the giant corporations. But here's an interesting statistic. 9 of the 10 largest internet retailers are already paying sales taxes in all 46 states that have sales taxes. Why? Because they have physical presences in the state. What the Supreme Court has said is if you're physically in a state, the state can force you to collect its tax. But if you're not physically there, the Constitution doesn't let you haul someone in from a distant state and force them to collect your taxes because you don't have any accountability to those individuals in a distant state. Now, in terms of the small mom-and-pop retailers, they're losing their sales to the big boxes and the big internet retailers, all of whom are already paying these taxes. So what do we have here? We've got a bipartisan coalition, unfortunately, that it appears is going to pass this Senate. But the coalition, I think, is driven by the fact that you've got big business united. You've got the big business bricks and mortar companies and the big business online retailers all together because the impact of this bill is to hammer the small business online retailers, to make it harder for the little guys to compete. And so you see a strange alliance here in Washington, but one that I think is exactly backwards what we ought to be doing. You know, I think it is fundamentally unfair to ask a Texas business to collect taxes for California Governor Jerry Brown or for New York Mayor Bloomberg and a nanny state, in particular because they can't hold those politicians accountable. They don't have a presence there, they don't vote there, they don't have influence there, but yet they're being dragooned into collecting those taxes. I think that's fundamentally not right. Let me give you an example of how this will hurt small businesses, which is there's a woman in Texas named Ann Whitley Wood who wrote a letter to our office. She lives in Dallas and has created an online consignment store. Even though it's largely a one-person operation, she may come close to doing $1 million in sales, which, keep in mind, are not profits, those are gross sales. Her letter said, quote, "Legislators must understand that it is both possible and common sense for a small seller like me to reach the $1 million in sales with a near one-person operation." She estimates it could take her 6 weeks a year to comply with the sales tax procedures for all of the collecting states. That impact on a small business is crushing. A giant corporation has accountants, has lawyers, has people designed to deal with that. A small business, it hits them in particular. And let me point out, even more fundamentally, the internet has been this incredible haven of entrepreneurial freedom. It has enabled people to start businesses with nothing out of their garage and sell all over the world. It has transformed the ability for single moms and Hispanics and African Americans and people with nothing to go and start a business, because it used to be that you needed this big distribution network, you needed warehouses, you needed trucks, you needed all of this, and so it was difficult for someone to start a small business. The internet has transformed all of that. There are 2.3 million Hispanic small business owners. The internet has been critical to their being able to open those small businesses because it lets them communicate with the world and get their products out. I believe the Senate should treat the internet as a safe haven, that it should be treated as free from taxes and regulations that would hamper the entrepreneurial spirit, that would make it harder for the little guy, for small businesses to be created, to grow and thrive. When they become gigantic corporations, they'll have physical presences in the state, and then they're subject to the taxes. But don't hit them when they're getting started on the internet. I think it would be absolutely foolish to do anything to impinge on the entrepreneurial freedom of the internet. In conclusion, I want to say 3 very simple things. Number 1, in my judgment, we should not be taxing the internet, period. Number 2, we should not be increasing the burdens on small businesses, particularly at a time of economic challenge, period. And number 3, Mr. President, we should not be favoring politicians and big business at the expense of the little guy, at the expense of the single mom trying to start a small business to feed her kids, at the expense of the Hispanic immigrant trying to start a small business and work towards the American dream. We should not be standing with politicians looking for more tax revenue and big businesses looking to make it harder for their competitors to survive. Instead, we should stand up with the little guy, the small business, with the American people. I would urge the Senate to reject this bill. And if the Senate does pass it, I would urge the House to listen to the American people on this and reject the bill as well. I yield the floor.